Hi, I'm State Senator Joe Markley here at the Capitol. It's Thursday afternoon, coming up on 2 p.m., and I'll talk a little bit about our bad timing, as I often do. It's coming up on 2 p.m., and we haven't even started to caucus yet. I think there's a possibility that we might go in by 4 o'clock or something like that. Wednesday, we didn't even go into session until after 5 o'clock. The flip side of that is we were here last night until after 2 o'clock in the morning. There's a side of me that thinks if we just could kind of adjust that clock once and start going in at 10 o'clock and leaving at 6 p.m., it wouldn't be such a bad life. And of course, there's a way in which I believe that you never make, the decisions you make at 2 a.m. are never as good as the decisions you might make at 2 p.m. That's a kind of a frustration of the job, and it's a kind of a procedural problem that I often mention in these circumstances. I said before that we're going to go into caucus, and I ought to just explain that term once for you too. The individual caucuses, the Senate Republicans and the Senate Democrats, the House Republicans and the House Democrats, all will meet together before the session starts to go over bills, to talk about what we agree with, what we disagree with, what we can put on a consent calendar and simply pass without getting into debate over, and also issues that might cause a lot of conversation. As I said, today is Thursday. The session has to end next week, Wednesday at 12 midnight. And what that means is, as time starts to get short, the amount of time that can be taken up by debate on any given bill becomes important. So if in the course of a day a bill comes up that is susceptible to, in the Senate, 4 or 5 or 6 hours of debate, in the House it might be 8 or 10 hours or more, you only can do so many of those before you run out of time. And that's the part in the session in which the minority party starts to have a certain ability to affect what is taken up and what isn't taken up. An example last night, and one of the reasons we were here late, was Democratic legislators took a bill that actually came out of Human Services and used one of these strike-all amendments, which I complain about sometimes, to turn it into a completely different bill, a minimum wage increase, which had not been discussed in the Human Services Committee, nor had the bill really come up anywhere else. Republicans who felt this was a bad procedure and a bad idea in the first place started discussing the bill. I did myself at some length. And let me say, not really at any greater length than I would have for any means, talking about what my concerns are about raising the minimum wage at this point, the ways in which I feel it fails to accomplish the goals that its advocates have in mind. And the result after perhaps 5 hours of conversation was that the bill was, as they say here, PT'd, passed temporarily. It was withdrawn from the floor with the possibility of bringing it back, but more often than not, they don't come back. Meanwhile, while these debates go on, the big issue remains the budget. The Republican House and Senate members put out a budget earlier this week that I have to say was far better than I ever would have dreamed possible. It restores all the cuts to municipal aid that the governor had proposed. It restores the money to the hospitals. It restores money to the nonprofits that have been struggling so badly. It doesn't increase taxes at all. It doesn't increase fees. It doesn't increase borrowing. In fact, it puts a cap on borrowing. And it still diverts money for our needed transportation programs. There's things in it I don't like. There's going to be things in any budget I don't like. But I thought it was a very, very good attempt. This kind of forced the Democrats to put a budget on the table as well. And when I saw it, I thought, why don't they just go along with what we put before them? Because I felt the Democratic budget was full of, if I say dubious fiscal shenanigans, I don't think I'm being too harsh with the characterization, including a number of these kinds of unspecified savings amounts, which the Republican budget managed to avoid. So now we have 3 budgets out in public. A Republican budget, a Republican legislative budget, a Democratic legislative budget, and Governor Malloy's budget. As far as I know, there's no real conversation going on between these 3 parties at this point, and I really have no idea what's going to happen. Our attitude has been towards the Democrats, if you've got a budget, let's go ahead and run it. In fact, you want to run yours, we run ours and we'll see which one gets more votes, because I think even Democratic legislators would look at that Republican budget and say it's an awfully good document under the circumstances. The circumstances obviously remain extremely difficult. I have glimmers of hopes that we might be able to do something in a budget way that will solve our current nearly $1 billion deficit this year and start on the road to structural changes, which is really kind of a bottom line for any Republican support for any budget proposal. But in any case, I will try to keep you updated on that, and I will come back to you again as we reach the waning days of the session. This is Joe Markley from Southington at the Capitol. Happy to speak with you, and I appreciate your attention.